because he was incidental to something much, much larger that was happening among Republicans in Louisiana, and that was sending a message to David Vitter to either go back to Washington or go home. So we have an incidental governor. That doesn't mean that that is a bad thing. It means that that's how he got here, and all you have to know that is what happened in the lieutenant governor's race and the attorney general's race.
I mentioned that earlier this morning, that if you look at the AG race and the lieutenant governor, those percentages were about the same, and so totally different in the governor's race. I saw something Saturday night that said that a Republican candidate, in this case David Vitter, or anybody other than David Vitter, should have won by 10 to 15 points.
Yes. At least the 10 that the other two did, and I would say because there was some roll-off in those two elections, fewer people voted in them than voted in the governor's race. I think it would have been more like 12 to 15. That's what should have happened. And Robert, let me add this. We don't have time to go into it, but listeners need to know, too, that working behind the scenes to harvest the anti-Vitter vote, which has been laying dormant since 2007, were Bobby Jindal and Scott Angel. That's what that was all about.
You know, pardon me, I had heard that Angel, especially south of Alexandria, was working like crazy to pull the rug out from under Vitter. But Jindal also?
Yes. And remember, that's the relationship, is Jindal and Angel. Angel was a Jindal product. That's how he got into all of this. So Angel brought in a lot of Jindal stuff to go with some Edwin Edwards stuff to try to be governor. When he fell short, then his real purpose kicked in, and that was to join a lot of other people who for a very long time have been waiting to, quote-unquote, get even with David Vitter. Scott Angel and Bobby Jindal orchestrated that symphony. Some people would say cacophony. We'll find out when we see what kind of governor John Bel Edwards is.
Elliott, let me ask you. Why was the John Bel Edwards campaign able to make this race a referendum on David Vitter's morality as opposed to Melanson back in the Senate race?
Well, it's interesting because everything in politics is timing. We always say that, and nobody really knows kind of what that means. I do. Here's what it means. Mary Landrieu ran in 2008 after Katrina and won again. It's the only cycle in which she could have run again. And sure enough, what happens? The next time she runs, she loses. In 2010, David Vitter ran in the only cycle he could win in, the Tea Party cycle. It literally swept David Vitter back into the U.S. Senate, regardless that there had been no accounting for 2007, the sin issue. Next thing you know, he's running again this time, and he gets beat. You have to be the right candidate in the right race, not just the right candidate. It's not just about being electable. It's about what is the demography of the turnout in that election. People simply are different in statewide kinds of turnout and in national or presidential or Senate election turnout. And we had Mary Landrieu and David Vitter that got an extra 6 years in office just because they happened to be in the right cycle. He got them both in the last year.
So in his concession speech on Saturday night, Vitter says he's retiring from the Senate after this term. Is that because he sees himself, or do you see him now that this sort of albatross of morality has been hung around his head and they figure anybody can do that now if they run against him? Is David Vitter retiring because politically he's damaged goods?
I would put it this way. I think we're saying the same thing, but I'll use the words that I know are as 40 years worth of right. He's not going to run the risk of losing that election, too. He does not. He's too young. He's got other things he can do. He does not want to end his career, and I mean end it, by losing two races back to back. You don't run that risk.
So what
does
Elliott Stonecipher see for a John Bel Edwards administration?
He has to understand how he got there. Bobby Jindal never did. Bobby Jindal thought he was king and that he had been anointed. He took us down a very, very not good path because He had the power to do it, and because he never realized how he got there. John Bel Edwards has to know he is an incidental governor. I don't know if he does or not, but I do know we'll know that by the end of the first special session, which will happen in February.
Pardon me for interrupting. Is John Bel Edwards, in your estimation, as you call it, an incidental governor? Is he capable of becoming more than that?
He is if it's him. He is not if he's going to let, Mary Landrieu and Mitch kind of run the Democratic Party, or if from inside the legislature, the Black Caucus is going to run the Democratic Party. I think John Bel Edwards can do it, but he's got to do it strictly himself. I don't know that anybody does that anymore. But if he wants a second term, and by the way, everybody needs to remember Jeff Landry. He's probably, that's the Attorney General-elect, he's probably the new face of the Republican Party. He's going to be lurking nearby. If John Bel Edwards gets this wrong, and we're going to know that in the first year. Remember, we knew that about Bobby Jindal, some of us did, before he was inaugurated the first time. It's just that people don't want to believe those things. So, he can do it, but he's got to shut out all the people who want Louisiana to be a Democratic Party state, and I mean in the model of Mary Landrieu, a Democratic Party state. He'll serve one term if that happens.
I've heard from folks, political folks around this area, that behind the scenes, John Bell's a pretty tough guy. Is that legit?
Yes, and you saw it in the first of the two televised debates. I thought he was just way too aggressive in that debate because he's supposed to be the good guy to David Vitter being the bad guy. He came across so aggressive and so over-the-top aggressive that I was kind of taken aback. I don't know that that's who he is, but I know this. That's another thing he has to watch. I get the military background. We all are impressed by it. But nobody's going to salute him because he's governor.
Did David Vitter ever have a chance?
No, never did. Remember, David Vitter's decline line started 6 weeks before the primary election, did not bottom out until about 2 weeks before Saturday night. And it only came back a few points then.
Pardon me. So the immigration thing, the last-minute Syrian crisis, if you will, even that wasn't enough. If he'd had another week to get him over the top.
No, a week would not have done it. I don't think he could have gotten there in this cycle. I mean, I just don't think he could. When people understand how much was arrayed against him, and like I say, specifically including the whole Jindal thing, whatever is left of that sputtering machine with Scott Angel on the point, I mean, it just was not going to happen.